Everyone claims to be logical, but how many people do you actually know who think rationally? Not emotionally, not ideologically, not wishfully, rationally. This is where Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's partner for more than 60 years, built his greatest edge. Not in chasing hot stocks, not in predicting the future, but in thinking clearly when everyone else was clouded by emotion. Picture this. It's March 2020. The world is in panic. Stock markets are collapsing. Everyone is selling everything. Fear has infected every corner of Wall Street. And what does Munger do? Nothing. He waits. He watches. He thinks. While millions of investors are making decisions based on terror, headlines, and gut reactions, Munger is asking different questions. Not what should I feel, but what do I actually know? Not what is everyone else doing, but what does the evidence suggest? This isn't natural human behavior. Our brains are wired for survival, not accuracy. We're designed to react first and think later, but Munger spent decades rewiring this instinct. He understood that in modern life, the biggest threats aren't physical, they're psychological. The enemy isn't the saber-toothed tiger. It's your own mind lying to you, and here's the uncomfortable truth. Most of us are walking through life completely unconscious of how irrational we actually are. We think we're being logical when we're really just rationalizing. We mistake strong emotions for clear thinking. We confuse certainty with knowledge. Munger saw this everywhere. He watched brilliant people, doctors, lawyers, CEOs, make catastrophically stupid decisions because they couldn't distinguish between what they felt and what was actually true. Intelligence wasn't the problem. Self-deception was. The enemy isn't ignorance, it's illusion. It's the overconfidence that makes us mistake noise for knowledge, motion for progress. Munger believed most disasters, financial or personal, start not with bad luck, but with bad thinking. He said, knowing what you don't know is more useful than being brilliant. Let me tell you about one of the most expensive mistakes in business history. It wasn't made by someone stupid. It was made by some of the smartest people on Wall Street. In 1998, long-term capital management was run by Nobel Prize winners, mathematical geniuses, former Federal Reserve officials. These weren't amateurs. They had PhDs from Harvard and MIT. Their models were sophisticated beyond imagination. They were convinced they had figured out how to make money without risk. And they nearly brought down the entire global financial system. What happened? They fell victim to what Munger calls physics envy, the belief that human behavior can be predicted with mathematical precision. They were so intelligent, so educated, so confident in their models that they forgot the most basic truth. Markets are made of humans, and humans are irrational. Their intelligence became their weakness. They were so smart that they couldn't imagine being wrong. This is the trap Munger spent his life avoiding. He never tried to be the smartest person in the room. Instead, he tried to be the most aware of his own limitations. He collected mistakes like some people collect stamps, studying them, learning from them, using them as vaccines against future stupidity. Munger understood that the human brain is not designed for rational thinking. It's designed for survival. It takes shortcuts, makes assumptions, fills in gaps with whatever feels right. We see patterns that don't exist, remember things that never happened, and believe whatever confirms what we already think we know. The first step to rationality isn't becoming smarter. It's becoming aware of how consistently and predictably irrational you actually are. It's understanding that your brain is not your friend when it comes to making important decisions. It's a survival machine, not a truth machine. And once you accept this humbling reality, everything changes. You stop trusting your first instinct. You start asking different questions. You begin building systems to protect yourself from yourself. The problem isn't intelligence, it's emotion, fear, greed, envy. These are the forces that distort reality. Markets crash not only because businesses fail, but because humans panic. Opportunities are missed, not because they don't exist, but because humans hesitate. This is why Munger always said, it takes character to sit there with all that cash and do nothing. Patience is impossible when you're ruled by fear, and clarity is impossible when you're blinded by envy. He warned, without emotional control, even the smartest minds will destroy themselves. Think about the last time you made a really bad decision. Not a small mistake, but something that cost you significantly money, relationships, opportunities. Now be honest. Was it because you lacked information? Or was it because you were angry, scared, excited, or trying to prove something? Munger studied this pattern for decades. He watched incredibly intelligent people who could solve complex mathematical problems, perform surgery, argue cases before the Supreme Court completely fall apart when money or ego was involved. He saw doctors who could diagnose rare diseases but couldn't diagnose their own terrible investments. Lawyers who could construct airtight legal arguments but couldn't construct a rational financial plan. CEOs who could run billion-dollar companies but couldn't run their own emotions. The problem wasn't intellectual capacity. It was emotional discipline. Consider the dot-com bubble of the late 1990s. Some of the smartest people in technology and finance convinced themselves that traditional valuation methods no longer applied. Companies with no profits were worth billions. Eyeballs and clicks became more important than revenue. Intelligence was used not to see clearly, but to rationalize insanity. Munger and Buffett watched this unfold and stayed away. Not because they didn't understand technology, but because they understood human nature. They recognized the signs of what Munger called social proof, the tendency to do what everyone else is doing, especially under conditions of uncertainty. When everyone around you is getting rich from internet stocks, it takes enormous emotional strength to stand aside and wait. Your brain is screaming at you. You're missing out. You're being left behind. Everyone else knows something you don't. But Munger had trained himself to distrust these feelings. He understood that the market's emotions would eventually revert to rationality, and when they did, those who had stayed rational would be positioned to benefit. This is why he always said that investing is more about temperament than intelligence. Intelligence helps you understand what's happening, but temperament determines whether you can act on that understanding or whether you'll be swept away by the crowd. The goal isn't to eliminate emotion that's impossible and undesirable. The goal is to recognize when emotion is driving your decisions and to have systems in place to pause, reflect, and choose a more rational path. Instead of asking, "How do I succeed?" Munger flipped the question, "How do I avoid failure?" This is the principle of inversion. If you want to be healthy, first avoid what makes you sick. If you want to be wealthy, first avoid what makes you poor. Most people chase brilliance. Munger chased the absence of stupidity. He studied mistakes relentlessly. Bubbles, panics, corporate disasters, because those revealed what to never repeat. Avoiding stupidity isn't glamorous, but it is powerful. Because in a world obsessed with shortcuts, the man who simply avoids disaster will look like a genius. This approach came from one of Munger's favorite stories. A mathematician wanted to help his country win a war, but instead of studying how to win battles, he studied how battles were lost. He looked at every military disaster in history, identified the common patterns, and created a list of what never to do. The result? His army didn't win every battle, but they never suffered a catastrophic defeat. And in war, as in investing, avoiding catastrophic defeats often matters more than scoring brilliant victories. Munger applied this principle everywhere. When evaluating businesses, he didn't just ask, "What could go right?" He obsessively studied what could go wrong. When making personal decisions, he didn't just consider the best-case scenario. He worked backwards from disaster. This is counterintuitive because our culture celebrates positive thinking. We're told to visualize success, focus on opportunities, think big. But Munger understood that this approach, while motivational, is tactically dangerous. Here's why. The downside of most decisions is limited, but the upside is theoretically unlimited. If you avoid the big mistakes, the career-ending disasters, the relationship-destroying choices, the financially ruinous investments, time and compound interest will work in your favor. Consider Berkshire Hathaway's investment strategy. They rarely make the splashiest acquisitions or the most talked-about trades. Instead, they focus obsessively on not losing money. Their famous rule number 1, don't lose money. Rule number 2, don't forget rule number 1. This sounds simplistic, but it's profound. In a 40-year investing career, if you can avoid major losses, the natural growth of good businesses and the power of compound interest will create extraordinary wealth. You don't need to hit home runs if you never strike out. The same principle applies to life decisions. The person who avoids debt, toxic relationships, addictive substances, and dead-end career paths doesn't need to be exceptional to end up in an exceptional place. They just need to be consistently non-stupid. This requires a fundamental shift in thinking. Instead of asking, "How do I get rich quick?" ask, "How do people go broke?" Instead of, "How do I become successful?" ask, "How do successful people destroy themselves?" Instead of, "What should I do?" ask, "What should I never do?" Inversion reveals blind spots that normal thinking misses. It forces you to confront uncomfortable realities and prepare for scenarios you'd rather ignore. It's not as exciting as chasing the next big thing, but it's far more reliable. In a culture addicted to speed, Munger praised slowness. While others rushed to trade, he and Buffett waited. Sometimes years, sometimes decades. This wasn't laziness, it was discipline. Because opportunities are rare, and when you swing at every pitch, you miss the fat ones. Munger compared investing to baseball without strikes. You can stand at the plate forever, waiting for the perfect pitch. And when it comes, you hit hard. Patience is power, but only for those who can endure boredom without chasing noise. The modern world has declared war on patience. Everything is instant. Instant communication, instant entertainment, instant gratification. We can order food and have it delivered in minutes. We can access any piece of information in seconds. We can connect with anyone, anywhere, anytime. This convenience has rewired our brains to expect immediate results from everything, including long-term endeavors like building wealth, developing skills, or creating meaningful relationships. But Munger operated on a different timescale. He understood that the most valuable outcomes in life, compound growth, deep expertise, lasting relationships, require time to develop. And more importantly, they require the ability to do nothing while they develop. Consider one of Berkshire Hathaway's most profitable investments, Coca-Cola. They bought it in 1988 for $1.3 billion. Today, it's worth over $20 billion. But here's the key. Nothing dramatic happened. Coca-Cola didn't invent a revolutionary new product. They didn't make any spectacular acquisitions. They just slowly, steadily, boringly grew their business over decades. Most investors would have sold long ago. They would have gotten bored, or scared, or excited about something new. But Munger and Buffett understood that time is the most powerful force in finance, and patience is how you harness it. This principle extends far beyond investing. In a world where everyone is constantly pivoting, optimizing, and disrupting, there's enormous power in simply sticking with something good for a very long time. The problem is that patience is psychologically difficult. Our brains are wired for immediate feedback. When we don't see quick results, we assume we're on the wrong path. When others seem to be moving faster, we feel like we're falling behind. Munger called this the activity trap. People confuse motion with progress. They trade frequently because it feels like they're doing something productive. They change strategies constantly because new approaches feel more hopeful than old ones. But activity is often the enemy of results. The stock market rewards patient capital. Careers reward deep expertise, developed over time. Relationships reward consistent care over flashy gestures. The most successful people Munger studied had one thing in common. They could sit still. They could endure periods of apparent inactivity without panicking. They understood that the most powerful forces in life, compound interest, skill development, trust building, work slowly and invisibly. This requires a fundamental reframing of how we think about time. Instead of asking, "How fast can I get there?" ask, "How long can I sustain this?" Instead of optimizing for speed, optimize for endurance. Instead of seeking quick wins, seek processes that improve over time. The irony of patience is that it ultimately saves time. The person who spends years carefully building expertise becomes exponentially more efficient. The investor who waits for great opportunities gets better returns with less effort. The person who builds relationships slowly creates a network that lasts forever. But patience without direction is just procrastination. Munger's patience was always coupled with preparation. While he waited, he studied. He learned. He positioned himself to recognize and act on exceptional opportunities when they appeared. Munger believed reality is too complex for one discipline alone, so he built what he called a latticework of mental models. Ideas from mathematics, biology, physics, psychology, history, economics. He said, "To a man with only a hammer, every problem looks like a nail, but with multiple tools, you see reality clearly." Example: to understand markets, you need math. To understand bubbles, you need psychology. To understand competition, you need biology. Darwin's survival of the fittest. This multidisciplinary lens made Munger unique. He wasn't just an investor, he was a constructor of clarity. Most people become experts in one field and then try to apply that expertise to everything. Doctors see every problem as a medical issue. Lawyers see everything through a legal lens. Engineers want to engineer solutions to social problems. But Munger understood that reality doesn't respect academic boundaries. The forces that shape markets are psychological, mathematical, historical, and biological all at once. To understand what's really happening, you need multiple perspectives. This approach made him dangerous in negotiations and discussions. While others were locked into their professional worldview, Munger could see around corners. He could predict how psychologists would think, how economists would react, how politicians would behave. Take his famous investment in BYD, the Chinese electric car company. Most investors evaluated it purely as an automotive play, but Munger saw it through multiple lenses. The physics of battery technology, the economics of Chinese manufacturing, the psychology of environmental consciousness, the politics of government subsidies. This multi-dimensional analysis revealed an opportunity that single-discipline thinking missed. BYD wasn't just a car company. It was positioned at the intersection of multiple powerful trends. The key insight is that mental models aren't just academic concepts, they're practical tools for seeing reality more clearly. When you understand psychology, you can predict how people will react to stress. When you understand physics, you can recognize when something violates the laws of nature. When you understand biology, you can spot unsustainable competitive dynamics. Munger spent decades collecting these models. He read voraciously across disciplines. He sought out experts in fields completely unrelated to business. He treated every conversation as an opportunity to add new tools to his intellectual toolkit. The result was a mind that could process complex situations from multiple angles simultaneously. This made him seem prescient. But it wasn't magic, it was methodology. Why is envy so destructive? Because it blinds you to your own game. Munger observed that most financial mistakes come not from poverty, but from comparison. People see their neighbor's house, car, or portfolio, and they self-destruct, trying to match it. He said, "It's not greed that drives the world, but envy." This is why Berkshire never tried to be flashy. They built quietly, without caring what Wall Street thought. And that's why they endured while others burned out. Envy is perhaps the most modern of all sins, because social media has weaponized comparison. We're constantly exposed to curated highlights of other people's lives, creating an endless stream of reasons to feel inadequate. But Munger understood envy long before Instagram existed. He saw how it destroyed investors, executives, and entire companies. People would abandon perfectly good strategies because someone else was doing better. They would take foolish risks to keep up with competitors. They would sacrifice long-term wealth for short-term bragging rights. The tragedy of envy is that it's completely counterproductive. Unlike greed, which at least motivates action toward your own goals. Envy motivates action toward someone else's goals. It hijacks your decision-making and points it in directions that don't serve your interests. Consider the technology boom of the late 1990s. Munger and Buffett were mocked for not investing in internet companies. Their returns lagged behind tech-heavy portfolios. Financial media questioned whether they had lost their touch. A less disciplined investor might have abandoned their strategy out of envy. They might have bought tech stocks just to keep up. But Munger understood that comparing their results to others was pointless. Their job wasn't to beat everyone else every year. Their job was to compound wealth over decades. When the bubble burst, those who had chased performance out of envy suffered catastrophic losses. Meanwhile, Berkshire's patient, unfashionable approach suddenly looked brilliant again. This pattern repeats constantly. People abandon good strategies because someone else is temporarily doing better. They change careers because a friend got promoted faster. They make investment decisions based on what's working for others, rather than what makes sense for them. Munger's solution was radical. He stopped paying attention to what others were doing. He focused entirely on his own game. He measured success not against others' results, but against his own potential. This requires tremendous psychological strength. Humans are social creatures. We're wired to care about our position relative to others. Ignoring social comparison feels unnatural, even dangerous. But Munger recognized that in modern life, this instinct is counterproductive. Your financial success doesn't depend on beating your neighbor. Your career doesn't require outperforming your colleagues. Your happiness doesn't come from having more than others. The most successful people create their own scoreboard. They define success on their own terms and measure progress against their own goals. They celebrate others' victories without feeling threatened by them. They focus on playing their own game as well as possible, rather than playing others' games badly. True freedom doesn't come from wealth. It comes from rationality, from the ability to see clearly, act calmly, and stay disciplined when everyone else loses control. Munger and Buffett didn't win because they were the smartest men alive. They won because they refused to be stupid, refused to be rushed, refused to be ruled by envy. This is the legacy of Charlie Munger. Not speed, not genius, but clarity. So now the question turns to you. Will you live as a reactor, controlled by envy, fear, and noise? Or will you live as Munger taught, rational, patient, and free? The path to rationality isn't complicated, but it's not easy. It requires constant vigilance against your own biases. It demands the humility to admit what you don't know. It asks you to be patient in an impatient world, disciplined in an undisciplined culture, rational in an emotional environment. But the rewards are extraordinary. When you learn to think clearly, you see opportunities others miss. When you control your emotions, you make decisions others can't. When you build mental models, you understand reality at a deeper level. Most importantly, you become free. Free from the opinions of others, free from the tyranny of short-term thinking, free from the exhausting cycle of boom and bust that controls most people's lives. This is Charlie Munger's greatest lesson. Rationality is not just an intellectual exercise, it's a way of life. And for those who master it, it becomes the rarest and most powerful superpower of all. The choice is yours. You can continue living, as most people do, reactive, emotional, driven by comparison and fear, or you can begin the long, rewarding journey toward rational freedom. The path is clear. The question is, will you take it?